reflects many years of erosion and destroyed much of the original fort. But the scene was much different in 1865 as the Federals planned an all-out offensive to take Fort Fisher.
I saw from the ramparts of the fort the lights of the Great Armada as one after another appeared above the horizon.
January 12, 1865. The Union fleet of transports had 58 warships assembled off the coast near Fort Fisher. Over the next 2 days, the Federals land troops north of the fort as the Navy maintains a constant bombardment.
The aim of the enemy is very plain to me. If they are permitted to remain there, the reduction of Fort Fisher is but a question of time. General Chase White, Senior Confederate Officer.
The first object which I had in view after landing was to throw a strong defensive line across the peninsula so as to protect our rear from attack while we should be engaged in operating against Fort Fisher. General Alfred H. Terry.
Such a storm of shells poured into Fort Fisher that forenoon as I believe had never been seen before in any naval engagement. Thomas O. Selfridge, USS Hero.
A tremendous fire was kept up from the entire fleet. Its effect was terrible, the works being torn to pieces. The exhausted condition of our men now greatly decimated by 56 hours of hard fighting, rendered it necessary to fire at the fleet seldom and at long intervals. Major William J. Saunders, Chief of Artillery, Fort Fisher.
January 15. 2,000 sailors and Marines come ashore to join Federal land forces. They moved down the beach to attack the northeast bastion shortly after 3 p.m.
They were packed like sheep in a pen, while the enemy were crowding the ramparts not 40 yards away and shooting into them as fast as they could fire. Commander Selfridge.
I have been in a great number of battles, but I never saw men fall so fast in my life. Seaman William Cobb, United States Navy.
At 3:25, the Army's 1st Brigade attacks the western salient. The Federals come under heavy fire as they attempt to break through the gate at Shepherd's Battery. They finally succeed and gather at the base of the fort. The bluecoats clamber up the fort's outer wall, and the rebels hit them hard. A bitter hand-to-hand struggle ensues as Union soldiers overrun the battery. The 2nd Brigade soon follows as Confederate artillery from Battery Buchanan rains down upon both sides.
A comrade next to me on the traverse was shot in his brains and killed. His brains splattered in my face. Corporal Henry McQueen, 1st Battalion, North Carolina Heavy Artillery.
As the men were being shot down one by one, our boys took the places of the dead and disabled. I looked around and saw the stars and stripes float from the top of the parapet with what seemed to me to be 1,000 bluecoats around it. Private Zach Fulmore, 1st Battalion, North Carolina Heavy Artillery.
The Federals move on to the 3rd and 4th batteries and send in the 3rd Brigade. Only 30 minutes have passed since the initial land assault, and more than 4,000 Federals now crowd the area around the western salient and pour onto the parade ground. Having repulsed the naval ground attack on the northeast bastion, the rebels soon realize the enemy has overrun Shepherd's Battery.
I turned to look at our left and saw, to my astonishment, several Federal battle flags upon our ramparts. Colonel Lamb.
General Whiting impulsively orders a counterattack.
The
struggle for the fourth traverse was the hottest and most prolonged singles contest of the day. General N. Martin Curtis.
It was an endless struggle. The enemy and our men firing into each other's faces at a few paces distance. Sergeant T.A. McNeil, 1st Battalion, North Carolina Heavy Artillery.
General Whiting is wounded in hand-to-hand combat along the fourth traverse. Colonel Lamb desperately assembles his troops in an all-out defense of the fort's interior.
I beg the sick and slightly wounded to come out and make one supreme effort to dislodge the enemy. Colonel Lamb.
As rebel artillery stalls the Federal advance on the open parade ground, the Union fleet begins lobbing shells onto the fort's land front to erode Confederate resistance.
Just as the tide seemed to have turned in our favor, the remorseless fleet came to the rescue of the faltering Federals. I believe the determined assault with the bayonet would drive them out. Charge bayonets! Forward, double quick! Mark! Colonel Lamb.
Colonel Lamb is shot in the hip. The charge fails. Command falls to Major James Riley. Abbott's brigade of 1,400 Federals pours into the fort around 6 p.m. General Terry orders them to continue to pursue the weakened Confederates.
Climbing over the dead, wounded, and dying, literally piled upon one another, we opened fire at once with our Spencers, soon silencing the enemy. We then charged and drove them from one traverse to another, until 9 more are in our possession. The stronghold was ours. Captain William H. Trickey, 3rd New Hampshire.
By 9 p.m., the Federal mop-up operation is underway. Riley evacuates the injured Lamb and Whiting to Battery Buchanan.
The final Union push compelled me to fall back from one position to another until we were driven from the fort. And with saddened hearts, marched away from the fort we defended with all our might. Major James Riley.
The 27th U.S. Colored Troops enter the fort and aid in the push to Battery Buchanan.
As we came into close proximity of the battery, we could dimly discern men on top of it. As soon as they saw us, they disappeared. We continued to advance and suddenly came into the presence of the enemy. Lieutenant Albert Jones, 27th U.S. Colored Troops.
Major Riley is out of options and forced to surrender. General Alfred Terry enters the fort and accepts the surrender of Fort Fisher from the wounded General Whiting.
I surrender, sir, to you the forces under my command. I care not what becomes of myself. Goodbye, boys. You have got us, but you have done your duty well. General Whiting.
Thousands of rockets and colored lights went up from the fleet, which were reflected again and again in the mirror-like water. C. McFarland, Federal Surgeon.
It was a grand pyrotechnic display. Colonel Lamb.
Thus, after 2 separate engagements, with a cost of nearly 4,000 casualties on both sides, Fort Fisher belongs to the Union, and the harbor below Wilmington is closed at last.
I can have your attention, please. It's time for